Hey Untold Radio Network fans, want exclusive perks and to support our channel? Introducing our YouTube membership program with 3 amazing levels. Get loyalty badges that level up to different cryptids the longer you're a supporter. How cool is that? You'll also get access to custom Bigfoot emojis and priority in chat. Upgrade to Backstage Pass for exclusive wallpapers, photos, status updates, discounted books, and merchandise. Go all in with the producer level for everything mentioned plus member shoutouts. Ready for an enhanced experience? Join now, pick your membership level, and let's make this journey even more exciting together.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us on the Untold Radio Network. Tonight, Jason and I will be checking out the documentary A Race of Giants from filmmaker JMichaelLong. The film asks, legends and history speak of giants that once walked the earth. So where did the evidence for these beings go? Did the Smithsonian Institution cover it up? Moreover, what do cross-cultural tales of ancient malevolent giants have to do with the biblical narrative of the Nephilim? These are just some of the questions that we'll be addressing tonight on Mysterious Library.
It's another Mysterious Library. I would like to say things are going to go according to plan, but they will not. Not today. Not today. And in no small part because it's friggin' hot where I'm at right now. I'm a 5th generation Texan. I do not get surprised that it gets hot in Dallas. Okay, straight up. I just don't. It's 115. It's only like 90. When I say it's only 97 degrees, I don't mean that ironically. I'm not trying to play funny with anyone. I do see 97 degrees as not being all that hot. However, it is because of the humidity. It's 100. It feels like it's 115 degrees, and my AC is like, no. The best you're going to get is like 80, 87, 89 degrees inside your house. I think we just got it down to 85. Like it's not happening.
Man, that's some suffering for your art right there, or suffering for your show.
It is. Oh, no, it is. I thought about it. I'm like, I wonder, could I take this to like Buc-ee's and hang out in the AC? Like just set up a little green screen. But then I figured that would be weird. So.
Well, you guys get brutalized in Texas. Even here, I have my AC on. I'm from Sydney, Australia, of course, and I've never lived in a house when I was in Sydney ever that had central air.
Ouch.
Like, it sounds ridiculous to Americans because it's, it can get like Texas hot and humid there in parts of the country.
Oh, absolutely.
But I've never experienced central air or heat there. So ironically, as brutal as the winters are here, I'm normally warmer inside my house in the Northwoods of Wisconsin than I ever was in Sydney's relatively reasonable winters. And
Yeah.
here inside my house, I'm always cooler, even on the days which match Sydney's heat, which aren't that many, but they do come in the summer. But speaking of this time of the year, of course, it's almost the solstice. And so
Mhm.
outside here, unlike winter, when you can't go outside after 5 o'clock for fear without a torch because
Yeah.
you're going to fall over, here you can still read a book at 9 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
So I was racing, as you know, to lock my chickens in because they won't go in when it's still light. They're free range. They do whatever the devil they want to. It has to be dark for them to go into their coop.
Mhm.
And I realized I'm not wearing my normal standard pretty red hat tonight. I'm wearing my manky farmer. Look, it's this old stained America hat covered in
I
sweat
love it though.
stains.
Looks nice.
So it's not a fashion statement as much as I do love America. So I'm happy to make that statement. But yeah, this is my manky working in the yard with the chickens hat and gardening and, doing the rest of it. And I just happened to run in and I plopped down. I'm like, oh, no nice hat tonight for the viewers. Not that anybody probably cares, but I do. It looks pretty funny.
No, I like
Texas
it.
hat.
Well, real quick,
Manky America hat.
to Texas Jack's point, it's only June. Here's the thing. I don't mind it being hot. It's this that we've had a very wet spring. So it is, and like we've had several storms so it is stupidly humid around here. Like it's just like it is stupidly humid. And so that's what's really killing it is it won't, there's just nothing, like the heat just stays. Like I said, it's only 97 degrees. I'm not kidding when I say, like, I use the word only on that. I'm not kidding when I say that. I do see 97 as not all that hot. But when you have this much humidity and it's like, no, it feels like it's 115 degrees. Okay, now we're pushing a few limits here. So, like I said, I when I was out in Phoenix, it was like 105, 108. But it was a real dry heat. I was fine. I'm like, this is beautiful. I wish it could be like this. But North Texas has a lot of moisture, and right now it's just stupidly humid. And real quick, to V's point, sorry. Says, but you're in Texas and Texas rules. Yes, this is not a complaint. Like I said, trust me, you'll know when I'm complaining. This is not a complaint. It's hot. So I may not be in the best mood at the moment. Because like I had to take a cold shower just to come in here and cool off. And I've got my ice.
Because I'm so
tea.
handsome, Jason, you need to take a cold shower before the show.
Clearly, that's what I'm referring to.
Not the Texas heat.
No.
The Australian heat.
Yeah.
I think I saw something here in chat we should mention, though, because we have a membership program now for Untold Radio where there's all kinds of cool perks. And it looks like Patricia Younger
Coca
is a new member. So thank you, Patricia, for joining us here on the mystical, wonderful, strange, weird journey that Untold Radio AM is, or the Untold Radio Network is.
And congratulations on all the goodies you get in all the at the different levels. Like we just ran that video, all the new levels where you get all kinds of fun things.
That's cool.
Congratulations on that.
So, in fairness, you chose tonight's documentary. So, for people who are watching it might think it moves at a slowish pace. I'm only teasing you because you brought it up and said it was slowish. I think it's good, though. I think the information in it is interesting.
Yes. Okay. So, I want to get the part I don't like about it out of the way first. It's boring. It's real boring. Like I really wanted to like this one. I really did. And I'm sorry if you made it and you're watching this, my apologies. I had to watch this thing in sections because there is really good information in this and I wanted to really root for it. And there's some stuff we're going to talk about here in a little bit, but it's dull. It's really, really dull. I'm sorry. I mean this with all love and respect, but it's dull. So normally we suggest all of the documentaries were like, hey, here's the good thing about it. And this is where it's a little fun and quirky. No, this is not fun or quirky. Now, I'm not going to say it's not worth watching, right? I will just say that before you watch it, you need to be prepared for a slog because it's not even that long. It's not even like an hour and a half, but it feels so much longer. I'm not going to lie, guys. I had to break it up into smaller sections to watch it, dude. It's hard. It's hard to finish. Like normally I'll one of the things I like about doing our documentaries is I can work and do it at the same time, right? I can listen to it because most of the things, let's face it, it's mostly it's the information we're listening for. And I can sit down, watch them one sitting, no problem, because I'm doing something else. I'm notoriously ADD. And I couldn't do it in one sitting. I'm sorry. Again, nothing but love for the guy who made it, for the directors here. But just full warning when you go into it, you may want to take it in like 15-minute chunks, or when it gets to like the end of a section, be like pause and go do something, because it is a lecture. It is a lecture with pictures. That's all it is.
Yeah, it's almost
So-
like an essay film or something. And
Yes.
I think that says something to our, I suppose, collective concentration levels today, though. We're so used to being hit with things which are fast and snazzy and 50 different talking heads intercut between them, and
Yeah.
that we're not used to just sitting and digesting
Mm-hmm.
information given to us in a rather, I don't want to say boring, but in a rather just type of
A
matter
very
of
dry
fact
way.
manner. Of course, too, the documentary probably didn't have a large budget, so it does refer back to the same imagery frequently throughout the documentary. I know, as somebody making a documentary at the moment, the man who
Yes.
invented flying saucers, about Ray Palmer and Richard Shaver and the creation of modern UFO belief, that
Mhm.
there are periods where you really have to dig deep to either go and shoot something, or to find that perfect piece of archival footage, or to get an artist to create something. That's
Yes.
the nature of documentary film, though. So I think some people, this isn't the first time I've seen it done. There are a lot of people who are in the
Mhm.
documentary space today, because of the access of digital technology, that have not a bad idea, but they mightn't have the resources or the wherewithal to fill that
Right.
documentary with a bunch of different images or archival footage. So sometimes it's far from the first time I've seen this in a modern documentary.
Yeah.
At this type of, low budget level, you'll see the same images being recycled. But for the viewer who's used to something snazzier, who's used to the type of,
Mhm.
almost music video TV style documentaries, that's
Mhm.
more difficult to accept. And also, we're so used to documentaries like this
Mhm.
rolling out at least several different talking head kind of experts or witnesses or people in the field or whatever. And
Yeah.
this documentary isn't that kind of film either. It doesn't roll
No.
out all of these experts and all of these authors, and it doesn't
Or
have
anyone.
a whole lot of in fact, I'm trying to remember, did they roll out how many talking heads are in this movie? There is.
None.
I can't
There's
even
no
remember. Yeah.
talking
I was
heads
gonna
in
say, I
this
can't
in this at
remember
all.
one, yeah.
Well, so let me get back to, again, I threw it, my ADD here is not helping me for this. However, I will say this part though. Like I said, there's a lot of good information, and there's some information I was not a fan of in this. And part of it is, if you're going to give us certain arguments, make a better argument. Tell me why I'm supposed to care about this, right? Make your argument. And the problem is, they don't really make any kind of an argument until the end. There's a lot of material that's loosely connected, and you're like, okay, well, but what does this have to do with the Nephilim? What does this have to do with the giants? How does any of this matter? Right? And that's the problem, is that in a lot of ways, I get what you're saying, and I don't disagree. I still think that I think fundamentally they're not, the filmmaker was not making the best argument by going deeper into why this stuff, like some of the stuff he was talking about, mattered. And there's a lot of things, I'm sorry, they're just out of context for what for the claims that were being made, right? And so, like I said, from an aesthetic perspective, I don't mind that he was repeating images or that there are no talking heads. That doesn't bother me at all. I think it would have still been better using the same aesthetics, the same everything, had he made a better argument and actually sort of explored. It was just information. That's all it is, without a very strong, um, without a strong narrative, right? Without a strong argument to be made. So it's like I said,
also some of this stuff, and I agree with all of that. I think you're right.
Yeah.
I think it's valuable for somebody who has no And I'm one of those people. I know more about the Nephilim than I do about the history of the archaeological discovery of alleged giants. I've heard it. We've
Right.
all heard it. You
Oh,
can't
yeah.
pick up a book on, Mysterious America or a broader, encyclopedia of the weird and not hear about supposed discoveries of
Mhm.
giants. So there's a lot of information there. They flash a lot of newspaper articles up on the screen. They make their point that this thing was meant to have been discovered here, and this six-fingered,
Mhm.
7-foot skeleton was meant to be discovered here. And there are some through lines, I think, where you can get some valuable data. One of the things
Yes,
which I found most
absolutely.
interesting is when they're talking about giants. So often these things are like just 7 to 8 feet tall, which is big, but it's not
Mhm.
like perhaps people imagine a giant being,
Yeah.
something out of Jack and the Beanstalk or something which is ludicrously big. Like, it's much easier to imagine that there was a time where a species of large humanoids in that height range roamed the earth
Right.
rather than thinking of something ridiculously tall. Of course, there's the occasional one which talks about 15 feet or something.
Yeah.
But
Or
so
somewhere
so
between
there's
12
that.
to
I
15.
was unaware that I was unaware there were that many supposed giant reports, which were just that 7-foot range, for example.
Yes. No. So this is one of the things. Again, I wanted to get my displeasure out of the way. There's one other part we're going to come to towards the end, but this is one thing I think it does very well in the presenting of just information. It does do pretty well is give you all of these instances where people are finding these bodies, right? Again, all of these accounts and reports over the last, 150 years saying, "Hey, here's what we found," right? And this is one of those points that unfortunately kind of, it's like, well, then why don't we see the bodies anymore? And it gets into the Smithsonian cover-up conspiracy theory. Again, that's not even a knock at it, just saying that's what it is. But they do a really good job of giving you a lot of different accounts, how there were dozens and dozens of accounts of people finding these things in Indian burial mounds back before archaeology had really come into its own, right? And it's one of those things where it is it's live. So it before it has come into its own, right? Before archaeology has come into its own, there were things found and they weren't kept as well as they should have been, right? And this is not just on the whole giant thing. There's a lot of, you can look through a lot of accounts where people find these things and they just bulldozed it over, right? They just said, yeah, we're done. Because it didn't value, the people who did the excavation didn't value because they were trying to build a road or build a dam or whatever. They didn't care, right? So that history is there, and they do. And so one of the things that this movie does very, very well is showing you how many accounts of 7.5, 8 foot, 9 foot, 10 foot. Some of these bones are, skulls are suggestive of 12 to 15 foot, and presenting the argument that is often made, which is, oh, well, these were probably just people suffering from gigantism. This is the one thing this movie does very, very well, which is say, gigantism even today is this percentage of the population. Does it make sense for gigantism to be just so prevalent that we're finding all of these bodies so consistently, and that there are so many accounts of, again, this is the other thing he does very well, is go through, particularly here in North America, accounts of giants from First Nations people and give them credibility. It's like, why don't we talk about this? Why are these First Nations accounts just discredited?
Well, I think we have that across sometimes the paranormal board where First Nations or Indigenous peoples encounters with everything from Sasquatch to strange, what I suppose would fit into fairy faith encounters, which is spoken of as much as being a realistic event as anything else in their cultural history, are just tended to be ignored. Of course, I think what interests me, and you might know because you're far more into archaeological mysteries than I am, to be honest. I'm interested in them, but you're far more adverse. I've heard the idea that the Smithsonian covered this stuff up before, that somehow they disappeared the bones. This goes so far to say they took all the bones into the middle of the Atlantic, which had been recovered all around America, and just dumped them. I don't know. I hadn't heard that extreme a version of it before, but I'd certainly heard the idea that somehow powers within the Smithsonian or within academia or
Yeah.
whether in archaeology or all of those things wanted to kind of put the kibosh on the discovery of these things, which questioned all kinds of things about our history and popular evolutionary theories of the day. So have you ever tracked that stuff, Jason? Is that something
Oh,
you're
yeah.
more conscious of and could speak a little on to those like myself,
Yes.
who only have a very small understanding of the theory?
Yeah. For a long, so again, for those who don't know, I had a misspent youth in archaeology, and I got a good up close look at how a lot of it went and realized this is not what it's claiming to be. And so at first it does sound kind of preposterous that the Smithsonian is running around hiding material. So at first glance, like, why would they bother with that? But the thing is, it's not even like, I don't think you need like Smithsonian G-men running around, sniping archaeologists or things like that. Archaeologists will do a good enough job of saying, oh, this isn't something someone wants me to find. It doesn't fit within the accepted parameters of what we can explore. This is going to go away, right? Or it gets wiped and then hidden in a basement somewhere. But yeah, particularly in the 40s and 50s, there were a lot of accounts of things that were like roadside attractions, and where people were saying, hey, we found this mummy this giant mummy while we were making this road. And they would be roadside attractions all throughout the West, right? And people would say, oh, and there's accounts of people seeing these things for years. And then there would be an article where it's like, hey, Miss Peggy's roadside, giant Indian mummy has been taken back to the Smithsonian for testing, and they're going to bring it back, and it never shows back up. This happens a lot. There were a lot, and you can find articles written by the local newspapers saying, hey, the thing that y'all have seen for years, it's not here anymore because the Smithsonian wants to test it because they're really impressed by it and they'd like to learn more about it. And then nothing ever happens again. It just disappears, and the Smithsonian will say, we don't know anything about this. And it's like, but we have the people who owned this thing for years saying that you took it. We have the newspapers saying that you took it. You're saying you've never seen it, right? It's entirely possible. Again, to be fair, it's possible that all of these roadside attractions just used that as an excuse to get rid of their, a fake whatever. The thing is, that doesn't, I mean, let's be honest. So many roadside attractions are clearly crap anyway, right? They're just, because it's like, it's a roadside attraction, right? Why would they all make the same story? That's for me where I think I'm a little bit more open to that particular theory. Is it's not a one-off thing. It's very, very common to have, again, documentation of people saying, this thing was here. We saw it for years. Someone from this, at least, let me again, being fair, claiming to be from the Smithsonian, said they wanted it for testing, and then it disappears, and no one has ever heard of it or seen it again, right? So they do address this, and again, the most extreme version is that that all of these bones that had been collected over the last 100 years or so will just get tossed out in the ocean. Like, they just dump them in the middle of the Atlantic so no one can ever get them again. And the thing is, there is reason to think that there is some sort of conspiracy when you look at things even today with like the elongated skulls. There are elongated skulls in which there is no sagittal suture. For those who don't know what that is, in the middle of any skull, you'll notice like you have your frontal lobe, your frontal plate, you have two parietal plates that join in the middle, and you have an occipital plate, and they fuse over time, but you see what looks like a line here. In children, that soft spot is where the two parietal plates are growing together and the occipital plate is growing into it. That little soft spot is where those three plates haven't fused. And allergies are going to kill me. This is the worst part of Texas, where it's just hot enough to not have killed everything off, and so everything's still, and so so all the allergens are flying around. Anyway, so the thing is, there are, and this isn't a question, it's a fact. There are elongated skulls that do not have sagittal sutures. They tend to have a larger cranial mass, meaning that the volume for the brain is actually larger than the surrounding population. It is not from head binding, because we've got plenty of skulls from people who have been cradle headboarded to deform the head to look similar. They all still have a sagittal suture, right? This is not it's not like these are genuinely odd skulls. The foramen magnum has been moved forward. The orbital sockets tend to be a little bit larger. Like these are legitimately weird skulls, and the DNA, when we have been able to get it, is distinctly different from the surrounding local population. The ones I am speaking to very specifically are from Peru, but we found but some of the genetic material we're finding in some of these skulls are from essentially the Baltic area in the old world. It's like they're not supposed to be here at all. And also, why does this skull look this way that it is? Well, the thing is, those skulls are everywhere. They've been found everywhere. However, the truly weird ones that were on display for years are now gone. You will not see them. Peru, the only ones you can find are in private collections. All of the public-facing, museums and in colleges that will have these materials on display, they have absolutely shut down those exhibits, and those skulls are no longer for public consumption. So that lends a lot of credibility, because people were looking at these skulls up until very, very recently, and then they've pulled them. The only place you can see them anymore are in private collections right now in Peru. Like, that's it. So, whenever you see these ancient alien shows and they have these elongated skulls, I knew Joe Taylor. He was a friend of mine. He's the one who made those. He's the one who literally molded them from the skulls in Peru. I'm here to tell you, I know for a fact that these things were real, and that was one of the big problems they had, was they were on display very recently. They had to go to a private museum where they were allowed to take those samples and do the genetic testing. So, as preposterous as this conspiracy theory sounds, there's more than ample evidence to suggest that this is as legit a theory as anything for why we don't have these remains on display.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. Nobody who watches this show at any regular level is going to misunderstand me for somebody who has faith in science and its paradigms. And of course, archaeology is a type of social science which borders into the physical sciences as well. So it has a very kind of interesting space. So I can believe that people defending the paradigm would not want to put things forward which made the paradigm come into question. That said, the mechanism of rounding them up and shipping them into the Atlantic and flushing them overboard, that type of stuff is where you lose me a little more, when it becomes that conspiratorial. But I have no doubt, because I've heard of things which used to be on display and the museums will still have them, but you have to be like an academic and go down into the basement and they'll pull the drawer out and let you look at them. So there's certainly things that I'm trying to think of an example.
I'll tell you one right off the top of my head, that Joe Taylor himself, because he was a very well known and respected individual in archaeology, particularly paleontology, because he was a master creator for like when you go to museums, right? You don't, 9 times out of 10, you're not seeing the actual bones, you're seeing recreations that someone like he made. But he was also an expert jacketer. So like when they dig up something, they have to encase it in plaster to protect it. He was called out for very delicate work. So he was very highly respected in the actual boots on the ground paleontologists. At his funeral, Dr. Baugh talked about this time when literally Joe just walked him into, I forget the name, I forget which college it was, but it's a very prestigious college. Again, y'all know how bad I am with names. But the gunner's like, hey, can we take a look at these things? And essentially, they were 2 fossils that this paleontologist had found. He goes, look, if it was anyone but you, I wouldn't do this. But these were 2 fossilized true birds, not, the argument like, well, Archaeopteryx was a dinosaur in transition to a bird. No, these were true birds If you saw them outside your window, you wouldn't think anything of them. They were found well below where people claim that dinosaurs even began to evolve into birds. And the thing is, he's saying, yeah, I can't. He's written a paper on these things. They've been described. No one wants to talk about them or address them because they shouldn't have been found where they were. So to your point, yeah, this is not as kosher or as transparent or as honest a field as people would like them to be. Donnie's 100% correct.
It's pretty funny. Donnie says, for those listening, social scientists are just scientists who suck at math in the chat here. I think they mentioned too, I don't know if it's the one you have. Again, archaeological mysteries are not my forte. I have a passing interest in it, but I can't recite stuff. Don't you have like some axe or something like they were talking about in the
Yes. So this
show?
is the other part of the film I do have a problem with, is there's a lot of I don't want to call it cross contamination because it's not. This is again where the argument I think needed to be made better. There's a lot of material that is clearly from a creationist standpoint. Human footprints in material that's supposed to be hundreds of millions of years old. They don't make the connection as to why that has anything to do with the Nephilim or with giants. And one of the things I thought was the worst argument that they make is they talk about giant hammers or giant axes, right? And they talk about this. This is the London hammer. Again, Joe Taylor, he made this. This is found. You can. I've seen the original a number of times. You can drive to Glen Rose, Texas, and see it on display. It was found here in Texas, in London, Texas, in the 30s. The film does a very again. I don't want to. I'll just call it clumsy, but they make it seem like this is a giant hammer. It is not. This is true. This is 1-to-1. This was molded from the actual original itself. Okay. This is a very, very small hammer. In fact, there's these sections here at the end where it's like, I don't know if you can see them on the camera. I'll get it a little bit closer, right? There's these little grooves here, and it's really, really hard to see on this end. There's a little elevated section right there in the middle. This hammer looked like it's more like a jeweler's hammer, right? Again, artist. This looks like a jeweler's hammer. Here's the thing. Whoever made the film didn't even bother to contact Dr. Baugh to talk to them about this, because they make this claim that archaeologists claim, looked at it and said, oh, the hammer's 200 million years old or 500 million years old or whatever. The problem is that's not the argument made for this, right? And he says, well, because it's the iron is 96% or pure iron, therefore and they make this weird claim that it's too pure to have been found in nature. Okay, that's also not true, but who cares if it's found in nature or not? It's clearly manufactured, right? Oh, okay. Donnie asks, says there's a city called London in Texas. Am I the only one who thinks that's sort of ironic? All of Europe exists in Texas. And I'm not kidding when I say this. There's an Italy, there's a Paris, there's everything. Everything is in Texas. Straight up. So yeah, trust me, it's not ironic. It's all over here. The thing about this is that the strata it was found in is traditionally dated to being 200 million years old. The fossilized clamshells it was found with, again, date to about that time frame. Again, that's how it's modern. Yeah, it's dated in a modern thing. The real issue with this hammer is it does not rust. It was found in the 30s. And the reason it doesn't rust is because at least on the surface, the iron has been bonded with chlorine. That's very exotic. It is remarkably exotic, because I have personally spoken with metallurgists and scientists who specialize in corrosion experts. I said, hey, if you wanted to bond iron to chlorine to make it to make a metal that doesn't rust, could you do it? Everyone said, yeah, it's probably possible, because the thing is, chlorine and iron are reactive. In fact, we bond iron and chlorine all the time. It just turns into a ferric oxide, which is essentially a liquid. And so that's usually how it's used industrially. They all said, yeah, you could. We just don't know how you do it. And it's a lot more work than just making, a stainless steel today. It is a truly anomalous artifact. But the film doesn't convey any of its true importance. In fact, they would leave you to believe that the hammer is supposed to be that Dr. Ball and the others believe it to be hundreds of millions of years old. And moreover, they omit the chlorine aspect of it, the fact that it doesn't rust. They omit all of that, and they make you believe that it's large, that this is some sort of giant hammer. And they never make the connection between what does this have to do with the Nephilim at all? What does this have to do with giants at all? What do any of these human footprints or sandal prints or moccasin prints that are in material that's supposed to be hundreds of millions of years old, what does that have to do with the Nephilim at all? That makes no connection to it at all, beyond saying science isn't talking about this. Right. The mainstream doesn't want to talk about this. So it does a very poor job of trying to explain why these ideas are connected in any way, shape, or form.
It doesn't seem to posit a strong theory. You're absolutely right. It just tends to lay out this array of evidence without drawing it all together. And sometimes it does seem to be talking about giants 1 minute and then the anomalous discovery of an ancient skeleton, which seems to be at a level in the fossil record which would predate the evolutionary acceptance of the development of mankind, but it doesn't make any comment on what that is or the other. That also, to be honest, it doesn't handle the Nephilim issue, and I think it's up to us to do that probably tonight very well at all. It clearly points at it. It mentions the Nephilim a couple of times, and the film opens with a Genesis 6 quote on the screen, right? But then it doesn't draw all these pieces in together, because one of the reasons a lot of the evidence put forward, or a lot of the stories or tales, or however you might interpret what's put forward, interests me, is if there is a cross-cultural, gigantic, humanoid, or perhaps non-human race in prehistory on multiple continents, then you can start to go down the Heiser route that you and I have gone down many times and talk about the gods of the nations and the Nephilim maybe being all over, and what kind of influence did these things have on mankind in prehistory. And that's what interests me, even if it's just theoretical, even if we're wrong on our interpretation of it. That's certainly what interests me, that here seems to be what may be, if it is genuine evidence, because again, a lot of it's been disappeared or perhaps was fake, or who knows, depending what your position is, whether it was real or not. But let's take the documentary at its word and this evidence was real. Then that evidence seems to back up an awful lot of the type of theories that says that there was some kind of interaction between things that weren't human and were human way back in our ancient history, or our pre-ancient history. And as a result, these things spawned something between us and them, which were the mighty men of renown, or the giants in the earth on those days. And these things seem to be all over the planet. And there is theoretical kind of, butter to be made from that mix. Like, you can start playing with that. And it's not fair for us to say, well, this is where the documentarian should have taken the movie. But the reality is, yes, there doesn't seem to be any theoretical through line or opinion other than that there were giants, and it seems like the Smithsonian may have hidden the story. But I do think the richness of it can come out the backside. It sounds horrible. Can come out the other side of I'm not saying the documentary is that bad. We can get something extending the analysis, which is started there, at least theoretically, and says, well, what does this mean? What does it mean that there were these things all over the planet, perhaps prehistory?
Yeah, and Donnie actually says has a great line here that this is again the big problem I have, aside from the aesthetic of Donnie says it sounds like the filmmaker just threw a bunch of ancient mysteries into a big pot, stirred them, and said, "Ta-da, Nephilim." And that is what they do. There's a lot. They even say that there are accounts and creatures in First Nations lore and mythology that do seem to more coexist or sort of allude to a Bigfoot, right? Versus, say, a Nephilim. They even make that connection. So it's like, okay, again, you're cross-contaminating here. You're not explaining why this should be considered a Nephilim at all, versus something like a Bigfoot. Or if you want to make an argument that Bigfoot is a Nephilim, then at least make that argument, but they don't, right? It's just like, hey, here's a bunch of weird stuff.
I think Joe Fox has a great point, just quickly relevant to what we're talking about and what the documentary kind of talks around but doesn't address. And he says he believes that the way we date stuff is so totally off, even carbon dating, something is amiss. And that's a point I think you were making before, that the documentary will say, well, there are, human bones from millions of years ago, but it tends to then jump into the accepted dating models, which so much of people within a more non-evolutionary mindset are questioning. So it might not mean if a man's bones or footsteps are found with a dinosaur, for example, frozen in mud somewhere, that man lived hundreds of millions of years ago or tens of millions of years ago. It might mean that the dinosaurs actually live closer to us. So yeah, I'm suspicious to just, if I'm going to criticize, as I do all the time, the scientific paradigm, then I'm not really even comfortable taking one part of the paradigm then having to be working in that, because the entire paradigm might be wrong. It mightn't be that we were there with the millions of years ago. It might be that the dinosaurs weren't there millions of years ago and none of us were, and all of this happened much more recently than science is prepared to admit and archaeology is prepared to admit. But
well, I mean, this is, again, it's like, again, for people who would say, oh, this sounds preposterous, Jack Horner is on the record as saying he will not allow dinosaur bones with soft tissue that he has in his possession to be carbon dated. He won't allow it. And his express argument is, I don't want to give creationists the ammunition.
Good grief.
Okay. Well, hold up. Are you suggesting that there is carbon-14 to be found in these bones? Because if you are, then you've got a much larger problem here, because fossilization should, again, there's soft tissue, there's hemoglobin that is fully active. It's still soft tissue. We've talked about this on this channel a lot. That's a problem. Just the mere existence of that is a problem. But the simple fact of the matter is, if it's still got carbon-14 in there at all, then it's younger than 50,000 years, because the accepted threshold for carbon dating is 50,000 years. After that, all carbon-14 has broken down into the stable carbon-12. Well, if you do again, not creationist literature, but the actual journals of carbon dating, right? Because there are scientific journals in the field of carbon dating. They admit they are finding carbon-14 in diamonds, in artifacts that are supposed to, with things that are supposed to be millions of years old. That's a problem. That's a huge issue. So to your point, it does seem like if the filmmakers wanted to make a better argument, it should be, let's tell you who and what the Nephilim are. Here's the evidence for them being found. Here's the tools. I do want to get to Horse's point here in a second. But it's like, here's the tools. Here's the evidence that there were giants. Now let's explain why even if you don't want to come from a creationist, from a Judeo-Christian Christian worldview, specifically, if you want to come from a larger, every culture on the planet is talking about these things. If you want to mention these things, then it's to show that the history of our planet is not what we're being told that it is. And it's within that gray, it's like, hey, we got to break out of this paradigm, because everyone's telling us these things were real. Here's the evidence these things were real. And here's a bunch of other evidence saying that this is not what it's supposed to be. This is not what we're being told. And it's being suppressed by the academic world. So,
yeah, people should barrel into that just with intellectual curiosity, regardless of their religious positions. Charles Fort had no, time for any orthodox religion or science, but he could see that there were all kinds of manipulations happening in all of the sciences.
Yes.
I mean, he was conscious of out-of-place artifacts and how they weren't being explained adequately.
Yeah, or even addressed. Not even explained, just even addressed.
Right.
And that's one of those things people just, you find the wrong artifact, you become a florist. This is not, I'm not saying this because I haven't seen it. I'm not saying that because I'm randomly picking some non-archaeological career. There was a well-known archaeologist who found some materials here in America, and everyone's like, yeah, we agree that this is probably real, but we can't support it. And she became a florist. I think she's passed away very recently. This is how it works. You find something that doesn't fit. Again, there's all kinds of things being written all the time, but it's within a very narrow window. You find something outside that window, you either bury it or you get buried. End of conversation.
And sometimes the paradigm will just ignore it. I mean, a classic example of something you brought up before, as soon as they just start talking about soft tissue discoveries in dinosaur remains, I don't have to be this is the old common sense versus science argument. I don't have to have some degree in paleontology or in biology to find it seriously suspicious that something which was meant to have survived, was meant to have been alive on the planet tens of millions of years ago, its remains still have soft tissue. Like, I can bury a chicken in my yard and you could dig it up in 100 years and there'd be nothing left. There probably wouldn't even be bone, let alone soft tissue. So that you can tell me, yeah, this thing lived millions of years ago, but yeah, there's soft tissue in this one. The fact that the entire paleontological and the evolutionary world didn't go, we got a real problem. We need to be talking about this instead of just, oh, well, we'll make little excuses and we'll hide the story and it won't really be talked about. It wasn't that it was buried. It just wasn't given the attention that it deserved. So sometimes I think you're right. Sometimes the paradigm or people operating within the paradigm as defenders, the scientists, will just squash things. And sometimes they just kind of won't give them the importance that they require. Far less important things that seem to support the paradigm will be the focus of attention, and something which seems to shatter the paradigm, even if it's alluded to or recognized, it's just not given the attention it needs. So it doesn't make the inroads into popular thought that it should, because the gatekeepers of it aren't making a big deal about it, so it's never made a big deal of.
No, precisely. And that's the thing. We've talked about this a lot as well. We often don't even understand how we're being manipulated because they just won't have to hide it. They just don't talk about it. They don't necessarily, they don't have to take these bodies or these remains and dump them in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. It just needs to go in a box somewhere that's marked, item T1035. And that's it. And it's done. And no one will ever talk about it again. It will never be addressed again. And everyone's like, oh, okay, well, we're not talking about it. And like amnesiacs, we'll just forget that it ever happened. Again, we have
like the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark, I think, is the greatest analogy or example of that.
Again, top men. And it just goes in a warehouse somewhere and it's over. Conversation's done. I was gonna say this one for later, but I think since we're already talking about it, this is a good point. Horace says most carbon dates match tree ring counting pretty well to the several thousand years ago that the method works. Yes and no. There are materials that it is good at count. Like, again, 100% agree. There are materials that it's good. There are, however, there's plenty of evidence that carbon dating is easily manipulated and contaminated, right? But the point here is you can't have carbon-14 after 50,000 years. And yet we're finding carbon-14 in items that are supposed to be hundreds of millions of years old and therefore should not have carbon-14 at all, which means either carbon-14 dating is inherently flawed or these things are much, much younger than they're supposed to be. I tend to think it's actually kind of a bit of both. I think there's definitely there's a lot of issues with carbon-14 dating that we really just don't even have the time to get into. But the simple fact of the matter is, by and large, yes, carbon-14 for the last last 10,000 years is really solid on the point. However, the problem is we're finding it in materials where it should not be. That's the point, which is why it's a really uncomfortable subject for a lot of people. Because in the same way that the new telescope is finding fully developed galaxies where they're not supposed to be, right? And they're like, well, why is this here? they're finding carbon-14 in places where it's not supposed to be. So, yeah, there you go.
I just like to say I give science and scientists a hard time on this show, and I'm very grateful that Horace Smith, who's Professor Emeritus of Astronomy and Physics at Michigan State University, still always engages, still always criticizes us for our malarkey, and we always criticize back. So it's great to have Horace watching, listening. Thank you, Horace, for being a major part of the Mysterious Library family.
Absolutely. Again, we love you, Horace. Speaking of Horace, because he's made a number of really great comments, I want to go ahead and deal with them. Horace makes a great observation here, and I completely 100% agree. He says, again, to my complaint about the aesthetic and just being really terribly bored by it, he says, because it was a video rather than a book, it was actually hard to track, it was actually hard to track down references to items mentioned. Wrong format. Yes, 100%. This should have been a book.
Or an essay, or a long essay with
essay.
footnotes. Exactly. Either would be fine.
Because to Horace's point, there's a lot, and to your point as well, there's a lot of material in here where I'm like, whoa, hold up. Like, could you show me where this is coming from? Like, let's see your footnotes on this, because some of this stuff's really, really interesting. It really is. It's just, this was not the format for this information. He should have done this as a book or an essay with the footnotes, and then somebody else should have come along and turned this into a tighter narrative, into a tighter argument. But that's not what happened here. So, Horace, you're 100% correct. This was the wrong medium for the presentation that was made.
I will say, as somebody who programs film festivals that deal with paranormal weirdness like this documentary, and as a documentarian myself, it is tough. It's not an easy field to do a wonderful job in. And I do think, again, I really do want to give this filmmaker some credit, as much as we've criticized him, and probably in many ways rightfully so.
Yeah.
A, he made a feature film, which isn't an easy thing to do.
Yeah, no.
B, he collected an awful lot of data. He presents it in the way that maybe he thought it was worthwhile.
Correct.
I mean, maybe, I have no idea, but maybe the reasoning was, it's better that I don't beat a philosophical drum too hard about the connection with the Nephilim. Maybe this will make people go and do their own research. I don't know. So, I mean, I really do still think this documentary is worth watching. I know you were probably a little more bored or frustrated with it than I was.
Yeah, again,
I can certainly watch as a programmer and be critical and go, well, you could have done this and this and this, but I still hung there with it and was like, okay, that's interesting. Well, that's interesting. So
yeah, again, I'm happy to say, look, if y'all want to see it, it's on Tubi for free. It's worth watching. I would just do it in smaller sections, right? I wouldn't try and necessarily knock it out in one go unless you're doing something else. It's not an unworthy video. It isn't. Like, there's a lot of questions, and it shows, hey, here are the clips. Here's the clippings. Here's the information. There's just a few things I wish they had done very, very differently from an aesthetic perspective, and even from an informational perspective, because, again, to another one of Horace's great points, because he did watch this video. Oh, wrong one. Here it is. He says, a number of illustrations appeared to be misleading as to the size of the artifacts, which goes back to my point on the London hammer. Yes, 100%. Like again, the way some of the material was presented wasn't. I would have liked for them to have been much clearer, because here's the thing: there are absolutely artifacts that make zero sense. They are particularly in stone. We find a lot of hand axes. Like, they do show that picture of a guy's hand on a table with 3 massive stone axes. These are hand axes. That's the thing. They're larger than pizzas, like large pizzas that you could buy from, Mr. Jim's or whatever. Mr. Jim's is my favorite.
Mr. Jim's? I've never been to Mr. Jim's.
I don't know if they're local, if they're only like a Texas thing. I don't think they are, but it's a smaller company. Yeah. So, hold on. Papa John's, like that really big Papa John's pizza they have. Yeah. Some of these things are larger than that, and these are supposed to be stone axes. And this is, again, one of those times when you look at archaeologists and you're like, seriously, you want me to buy this? They'll say they're ceremonial. I'm like, but this it shows use. These are hand axes that show use, and they're this freaking big. Ceremonial? I'm sorry. Neolithic tribes are not known for carrying around useless materials. They just aren't.
There was one I put my skeptic hat on for, though, as I
Mhm.
often do, and there was meant to be, I can't even remember the exact details, but some enormous axe which had been buried in a pile of stone and rubble and was just
Yes.
sticking out. And the ancient Native Americans in that area
Mhm.
supposedly used to venerate or use as a place
Yeah.
where they did rituals or something. And I'm like, I'll be honest, I have no idea if that thing was an axe or not. That just could have been, some special
Right.
sacrificial table or something. I mean, just
Yeah.
because it kind of vaguely resembles an axe head.
Mhm.
So that's
No.
the problem with a lot of this, not just in this documentary, but often there's
But
some good
yes.
material, and then there's people doing these crazy reaches because they're as bad as scientists
Mhm.
sometimes. No offense,
Oh,
Horace.
yeah.
They
No,
want to fit
100%.
everything within a
Mhm.
paradigm. So their paradigm is there were ancient giants walking the earth. So, oh, this looks like maybe it was a big axe. So we'll include that in our story. And that happens
Mhm.
throughout the Fortean field. People who are just as eager
Yes.
to keep their
Mhm.
paradigm intact as the official sciences are to keep their
Mhm.
paradigm intact. So I
Yeah.
have a problem with that way of, behaving as well, to be
Well, and
honest.
and we addressed that on our very first episode, right? With the chariots of the gods, and how he, and again the ancient astronaut crowd, cherry pick images, and they completely take them out of context and create new mythologies around them. So 100%, that is a complaint I have as well. And again, fundamentally, that is my problem with them addressing the way they did with the London Hammer. It's like, no, you missed the boat on this one entirely. And so there's several points, particularly when he's talking about some of this other material, where it's like, yeah, you're kind of lifting this stuff out of context to make it serve your general point, but you're not even explaining why you're doing it the way you're doing it. And that is a problem that I have. And it's not indicative of just him. It, like you said, it's everyone who does this. Um, like you said, for that one specific axe head, yeah, I mean, that may not be. Again, I don't know if that's really the best one, because does it show use? I have seen I have seen axe heads that have stone axe heads that are clearly used. They show wear and tear, and they're 64 freaking pounds. And they look like a normal stone axe, but they're just, I'm not kidding, they're this freaking big. They weigh 64 pounds. They have chips where they're supposed to if you had been using it to hack things down. And people try and explain them away by saying, well, maybe they were used by two people. Oh, how? Right? This wasn't designed, because throughout history, modern humans within the last few centuries have used 64-pound hammers, but they look very, very different because they're designed to be used by a couple people on like a rope, and they grab them and they ram them into things, right? This is not unknown technology, but that's not what these things are. They are clearly scaled up stone hammers. And to your point, that's the one that he presents looks like it probably was just ceremonial, right?
And
That's
might even
exactly
have
what
been
it
an
looks like.
axe, incidentally. It might have had nothing to do with being an axe. It might just have been a similar shape or something. And so
Right.
it's been and this is where, again, it isn't that science innately is problematic. It's that we as a species are inherently problematic, is that when we believe
Mhm.
something, that we double down on that belief and try to find
Yeah.
everything we can to support it. And that's the problem with venerating science, because it's a sociological endeavor. And as
Mhm.
Charles Ford and then Thomas Kuhn, the greatest philosopher of science in the 20th century and probably ever,
Yeah.
explained in similar tones that, or in similar terms, is that we will go out of our way to defend what we believe in, and we will be
Mhm.
converted to that belief system
Yes.
because it's popular, and we will behave in more of a sociological way when it comes to accepting scientific data. And you see it all the time. I follow the
Mhm.
science. No, you watched a late night comedian who told you what the science was, so you say you follow the science.
Right.
Just like
Yes.
you would have, 1,000 years ago, followed the witch doctor or the priest or whatever. Whoever told you that this is right,
Mhm.
you would have said, aye, aye, Captain, and saluted. That's the problem with us as a species. We have a tendency to do all of these fallacies, looking towards
Mhm.
reasoning to authority, refusing to accept things which are outside our comfort zones. I mean, we all know these things just as people, but they
Mhm.
become dangerous when multiple people believe in them and then assert them, and then are very resistant to look at any thing which questions that
Mhm.
position that they've placed themselves in. And so I see it in science, and like you said, ancient
Mhm.
astronaut theory, and I saw it in this video as well. And I see it in ufology, I see it in spectre hunting, I see it in the cryptid realm, I see it all over. So
Yeah.
when I take a shot at science, it's only because it's more fun to punch up than it is down, and science deserves more of a punching. But I mean, we do it
Yeah.
everywhere. If there was a
Yeah.
common newspeak term of 99% of ufologists believe, then I'd be even more critical of ufology than I am. It's only that science has somehow become the new priest or the new witch doctor
Mhm.
and everybody reveres it that I'm so super critical of it, because it's just a sociological endeavor like any else.
Yes.
Had to fit in my
100%.
anti-science rant. Has to happen.
Well,
So many
let's
episodes as we
let
can.
Donnie back you up on that one. He says scientists are like medieval clergy. They understand a language that the laymen have no clue of, and they lord it over people. Yeah, I mean, sadly, in a lot of ways, that's what it's become. To your point, I follow the science. No, you're following what someone who was paid to tell you, right? And I know a lot of people, oh, you mean this? I mean a lot of things. I'm sorry, the last couple of years has not been kind to to mainstream let me rephrase this, not even mainstream academia. The academia that gets promoted by the broader news media, right? When people are like, here's the expert. No, that's the guy who was paid to say that.
Mhm.
That's a very different thing, because if you look real close, you realize, oh, he's paid by the same companies that benefit from him saying that.
Yeah, he's giving me
That's
the
a
narrative that his advertiser on that news show told him is going to want him
Mhm.
to say. And that but
Yep.
I'm still expected to follow the science? Come on, really?
Right. Because again, if you can't question it, it's not science. Ed has a great question. He talks about pareidolia in some of these stone works. So here's the thing: we've actually gotten really, really good at knowing when a stone has been deliberately manipulated into a shape. We're really, really good at because we've actually done a lot of experiments for 40 years. I think I think the guy has passed away. His name is Adeladdle Bob, but there's plenty of videos of him on YouTube. After you go look up Adeladdle Bob, and dude was brilliant. He figured out how to repurpose, and he goes through a lot of steps on how a lot of these Paleolithic tools were manufactured, how they were used. He was an archaeologist, but he practiced this material because we had to figure out, well, what are we even looking at with some of these tools, right? Like, one of the main assumptions that was made, that we sort of discovered both through that we corrected through ethnography and experimentation, was everyone thought you started with a stone and you made your projectile point or your knife or your hand axe from that one piece. And that we suddenly realized, by again watching current Neolithic tribes and our own experimentations, like, no, you found an edge, you made a flake, and you made your projectile point from that flake. It wasn't like, here's a stone, let me whittle it away. It was, I'm going to create an edge and let me manipulate this flake that I got into what I need it to be, because it's more useful that way. It's easier that way. It's sharper that way. So we've gotten really good at knowing when something is actually manipulated, when something's just, oh, it kind of looks like that weird shape. To which Texas Jack also asked, on these massive axes, he says, maybe the hand axes sit on the ground, blade facing up, and the material is to be cut is worked over the edge like a Neolithic bandsaw. Like, it's in. That's a really interesting idea. The thing is, the shapes don't really lend themselves to that particular setup, and it still goes back to, it's really large for that, when you could make it much, much smaller. Because we do have tools that are designed to be put in like logs, right? And again, Adeladdle Bob, if you have some time to waste and you want to see somebody doing something really cool, Adeladdle Bob, look him up.
Just quickly back to Ed, I just want
Yeah.
to say we'll be doing his book hopefully shortly. I've been blessed enough to be able to read the proofs for his Confessions of a Psychic Priest, because Ed
Oh, yeah.
Schultz used to be known as the Psychic Priest in America. He used to write for Fate magazine. He was an exorcist for Ed and Lorraine Warren. He's had lived this incredibly colorful life, and his memoirs are spectacular and just loaded with all this insight into the paranormal and to the weird and to religion. And so it won't be long, I don't think, until that book's published. So thank you for joining us, Ed. You're an incredible talent. It's great to have you here.
Oh yeah, I'm looking forward to that, to reviewing that book. I really am. Real quick, last couple points. Overbuilt asks if I think that the London hammer could be a Nephilim tack hammer. It's too small to be a Nephilim tack hammer. Could be a normal sized person tack hammer. I really do think it's probably something like a jeweler or metalsmithing hammer for fine detailed work because of the overall designs. It looks very similar to some aspects of modern jewelry hammers, but again, this was found in the 30s. Literally, London, Texas is still to this day middle of freaking nowhere, even for Texas. Like when I say middle, some people like middle of freaking nowhere. You mean an hour away from? No. London, Texas is in the middle of nowhere for Texas. Okay. There are whole nations that fit within where London is, and then anything you would resemble to be a major city. You could put whole nations in between that area. Trust me. This is not, maybe some, tack hammer got lost in a river somewhere, right? That's not what this is at all. And it's not like, I hate the fact that there is a museum of hammers is one of those things I wish I didn't have in my head, but I can't not have it there anymore because of looking at it. We can't find anyone who made a hammer that looks like this within the last 200 years. And again, it goes back to, it will not rust. That's I'll forgive every aspect of it. Maybe this is some hammer made by some smith that is unique to this one dude, and he just happened to lose it in London, Texas, and it got buried in the Kalachi because of a river overrun. I'll buy all of that. But why doesn't it rust? It's not stainless steel, which didn't exist at the time. It's bonded with chlorine. That's why it doesn't rust. All right. Who in the last 500 years made a hammer like that? We don't know. And no one has made a hammer that we can find that looks like this. I can come up with a reason for it to be shaped this way. I've got your answer there. I've got a story for that. I don't have an explanation for the chlorine, and neither does anybody else. And that's the problem. But yeah, I don't think it was a Nephilim tack hammer. It's too small. Joe points out that one of the great trades of not being in Australia, regardless of how hot it may be, is that there's no giant, ugly death spiders.
That's true. That and the Second Amendment, Joe, just saying.
Yeah. Although we do have some death spiders, but they're not as giant or ugly as the ones I've seen in Australia. Let me rephrase this. In pictures and videos that I've seen from Australia, because I ain't going. Like, I used to think, man, it'd be cool to go to Australia. I wouldn't mind going out there and looking at it. Then I keep seeing all these death spiders, and I'm like, nope. Same thing with Brazil. It rains spiders in Brazil. Screw that. Not happening. Not happening.
I used to seriously I could tell horror stories, but I had in my bedroom funnel web spiders, the type that will attack. They don't, like a normal spider, scurry away. They're like a tank. They'll raise up and come at you. Just saying. Not to mention just general kind of wolf spider, tarantula type things, which are the size of your hand on the bedroom wall or the bedroom ceiling at night.
Screw all of that.
Yeah.
No. I would be packing a live flamethrower the entire time, and I would not be shy about using it. I don't care what gets in between me and destroying that spider. Nah, you got a spider that's going to raise, and I've had that happen here in Texas, where it's like a thing this big, and it rose up and charged.
Wow.
There was zero hesitation to kill it. I have pulled a knife on a spider. I have pulled it, you don't understand how firmly ingrained in my DNA my hatred of spiders exists. And I love Spider-Man, but I have pulled a knife on a spider, and someone's like, Jason, I'm like, what? And I look down, I'm like, oh, I have my pocket knife pulled out. I was getting ready to skewer my archaeology professor's car because,
oh my goodness,
it was a wolf spider, and it was right here. And I looked up, and it's like the next thing I know, I have this knife in my hand. I'm ready to just start stabbing this thing.
Just instinct that came out.
Like it was like I'm Inigo Montoya, and I just found the six-fingered man, dude.
Yeah.
Yep.
We don't have anything that big in Wisconsin, so spider-wise, anyway.
Yeah. Like snakes don't bother me at all. Alligators, I'll wrestle a crocodile.
I'd pay to see you wrestle a crocodile. That'd be fantastic.
Yeah. Sounds like fun. I am just not worried about virtually any animal on the planet. Like, they don't scare me. I understand that they're dangerous. I will take all form of precaution, but they don't scare me. Spiders, in the wrong situation, it'll get scary. It'll get nasty real fast. I'm just saying, I can't promise. Like if it's between me and you, like I would chain someone to get away from a spider. That's all I'm saying.
You'd be like kneecapping me with the 45, so I'd fall over and the funnel webs would swarm my writhing body. No, Jason, I thought you were my friend.
Yeah, no. When I hear people talk about the cryptids of the giant spiders, I'm like, no, that's the one I refuse to believe in, even if they capture them. Like, nope, not happening, not real, because I cannot believe God would allow that creature on this planet with me on it. Nope. Trust me, I see a 3-foot spider. Whatever survives, I'm just going to say I'm going to lose any sense of propriety, and I don't care what the collateral damage is. That thing is going to die. It will cease to exist, and God help anyone or anything between me and ending that thing's existence. That's all I'm going to say.
Do what you got to do, man. Make it through the night. The spider-filled night in Texas when it's so humid and they creep out of the walls and are hanging above you when you go to bed tonight. Just be.
We don't need that kind of negativity here on this channel. We love every single one of y'all, and we will catch y'all next week behind the card catalog. Be good.